Hello everybody. Welcome to interesting conversation that I'm really grateful to be doing today with my mom, Laura Haynes, and we're going to be talking about a few different things. Mainly, a book that we read together that was really interesting, called "Being Mortal" by Atul Gawande. And we thought we would have a conversation about it and share it with you all. And one of the reasons I wanted to get my mom's perspective on this is because she is a registered nurse and has been for a long time and is also a Christian. And we've had throughout the years a lot of conversations about medicine and healthcare and being mortal. So we welcome her today to join us for this conversation. So Mom, glad you are here.
Thank you, Parker. This is a really cool opportunity to do this with you, and I appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, so could you tell us a little bit about your background as a nurse and some of your history with working in the medical profession?
Sure. So I graduated in 1983 with a BSN from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So I have been a nurse for 38 years now, I guess. And is that right? 37.
Yeah.
37. Okay. See, I can't count. It's way too long. And I have had a varied career, lots of different experiences. I've worked on most of my career has been in the hospital. I did do a brief stint in an orthopedic doctor's office. But most of the time I've been in the hospital. I've been in the emergency room. I've been in on the floor. I did post anesthesia care, the recovery room for 17 years. I've been in and out of ICUs for about 37 years. And currently my full-time job is in the operating room as a nurse. However, a couple of weeks ago, I was deployed to ICU. So I'm back to, it's probably my first love is ICU type nursing. And so that's been an interesting experience because I have been out of it for a couple of years. Let's see. What else do you want to know?
But you've Christian your whole life, and you have as a Baptist minister. So you have that unique combination of one of the things I said recently in a sermon is that medicine and nursing and being a doctor are very moral, ethical professions and lines of work.
Yeah.
And so I think you have a unique perspective in that regard. So tell us a little bit about your kind of your faith throughout your life and your upbringing and those sorts of things.
Okay. So I was raised as a Christian in a Christian family. We went to church every week, and we had services on Wednesday that the whole family didn't participate in, but I did growing up. I enjoyed the activities on Wednesday evenings and had a really good friend group. I was very active in our youth group. And then as I got married and we started our family, we raised all three of our children in the church. And it's just always been a part of me. I love small groups. I love Bible study. I love reading my Bible. I try to do a devotion every morning before I go to work, and I have been journaling for a number of years now, and I really appreciate that. God has really been very active in our lives, especially the last 4 to 5 years. We have definitely been through some challenges, and I just don't know what I would have been, the person I would be today, if it was not for my faith.
And right now, with what's going on around the whole world with the coronavirus pandemic, you're one of, you work in your medical provider in a hospital. And so one of these people that we're hearing about on the news, who are helping people. And tell us a little bit about maybe what that's been like, but also how your perspective as a nurse and as a Christian has impacted the way you understand what's going on right now, and maybe some thoughts you have about how Christians in the church can continue to be faithful in this time, or what that looks like, or just anything about your thoughts on what's going on right now.
Okay, and I am so sorry. The dog just jumped on the bed with me. So hang on just a second. Shh. So I am not actually on the front lines with the virus. I am in a clean ICU. It's a cardiac care unit. So for people that do come in with a heart attack or some kind of vascular problem, like an aneurysm or something, and has to have a cath lab procedure. Hang on just a second, Parker.
It's okay.
Hang on.
Okay, we had to get Nash out of the bedroom. So
okay, so I am not seeing the virus directly, but my role in the hospital has been to replace the nurses that were in this unit so that they can go and do the intense sick. So I am qualified to work where I am because of the skills I have. However, they're using their everyday, up to date type ICU nurses and deploying us with just in time education and the backup and skills that we need to handle the well type, sick patient. I don't know how else to call it, but it has been a very emotional and stressful time for me as a nurse. The only other experience I've had that came anywhere close to this was back in 1999. If you remember, we went through Hurricane Floyd, and our community, was flooded, and I couldn't even get to the hospital for 24 hours. And then once I did get there, I stayed a full 24 hours, and we were working in shifts to staff the hospital like that. So this, of course, does impact me physically because I could get sick from this. The other thing that I am equating it to is, and maybe some of your church members will remember, but back in the 80s when AIDS first came out and HIV first came out, that was a very, very scary virus. We thought it, anybody could get it. You didn't want to, be in that kind of situation either. And, the longer it's gonna, now very rarely do we have somebody that actually dies of AIDS because we can, maintain and handle the virus that caused the AIDS. So I think, and this is part of my faith, that we will be able to handle this. We will have a vaccine or some type of antiviral to come from this, and we'll be able to handle it going forward. I do feel like God is in this. I definitely don't think that he created this. I just think this is part of our world, the germs and the viruses and the, all the things that are in our world that can harm us. And our bacteria and viruses are becoming much more stronger to overcome the drugs that we have. And we've just got to, keep fighting the battle that we have in front of us. And you just take it a day at a time. You can't predict the future, and but it's definitely showing us that the people that have comorbidities, in other words, they have some type of disease or illness that they're already fighting, their bodies are just not able to fight off this virus. So it's very, very important that you stay home and you do maintain that social distancing as much as possible.
Yeah. And for me, I think this pandemic raises a lot of just questions and situations that I deal with on a fairly regular basis with people in my church at St. Timothy, with just the reality that we are mortal beings,
Yes.
and we are limited. And so I started reading this book, Being Mortal, a week or two ago, and read through it. It's a #1 New York Times bestseller. The author is some kind of physician. He's very distinguished, and it was a really interesting read, and it was really interesting to read it with everything that's going on right now. So we read this book. You read this book before I did, and you told me it was really good, and it was already on my reading list. And so I thought we would just use it as a jumping off point for a conversation about these topics, because this pandemic has just raised questions for me about how we think about this as Christians. Tonight, the night we're recording this video is Good Friday. So obviously, if you're watching this, it's not Good Friday, but we're recording this on Good Friday. So it's another very timely, interesting day to think about these questions. One of the things he talks about in the book is the way that as human beings, we live in modern society where we want to be independent. We want to be autonomous, to live for ourselves. We've distanced ourselves from people and families. Big families don't live together like they used to. We expect to live long, healthy lives well into our 70s, 80s, 90s. And yet we have to navigate the fact that we are mortal. That's the premise of the book, is that we are mortal and that we will die. And as this pandemic is showing us, is that, we really are mortal. So what was interesting to you from any of that as you read through this, and as you think about what does it mean for human beings to be mortal, and how do you think about that, and how do we navigate that?
Well, being mortal to me really wasn't anything new, because I have been seeing the death and dying side of humanity for quite some time now. I'll never forget when I first started as a nurse, and I would come home from work in the evenings, and Daddy had been out with friends, having a beer or just hanging out with them or whatever. And I'd come home and I'd be like, you don't understand. Life can change in the blink of an eye. Our whole world can just disappear, and we've got to, and he was like, what is your problem? But for me, seeing that you die and that's it, so being mortal, one of the things that I appreciated, he put into words for me that I guess I've always felt, is that medicine is about healing. Medicine is about a cure, or putting off death and dying, and trying to maintain our bodies and the health that we have as long as possible. And all of a sudden a light bulb went off for me, because we don't talk to each other about what do we want it to look like when we can't care for ourselves any longer. What do we want our final days, our final hours, even our final minutes, what do we want them to look like? Certainly no one wants to suffer. No one wants to be in pain. And we want to feel loved, and we want our loved ones around us. So I'll never forget when my brother, your Uncle Thad, died a year and a half ago. I was talking with the medical director for our hospice in Nash County, and he was just a really good person for me to just voice some thoughts, and and he was so good to answer my questions for me. And one of the things that he said that I will never forget is, we most of us, certainly your generation, have birthing classes, and you prepare for the birth of your child, but no one offers death and dying classes for the families or the individual themselves. Hospice tries, but a lot of times people don't want to call in hospice because, oh, well, that just means we've given up, that our loved one is dying. No, that's not always what it means. Because hospice can help us answer our questions and deal with our grief, because we're not just grieving the death of someone, we're grieving the lack of health. Our bodies are not doing the same things that we always expected them to do. So I really appreciate now more the end of life stage much more than I ever have in the past. And just this book, I never knew the history of the assisted living and the nursing home business, but it really makes a lot of sense. It's unfortunate it doesn't work like we would like for it to work, and it's just so expensive to do that, and it's not always. A lot of people don't even have a choice because there is no one to care for them. And I wish we still had that family unit where we could care for each other. I think that is the best, but it's not always an option because you've got both people working. You've still got, it's tough. Okay,
Yeah.
the nest is back.
Okay. And yeah, I think as we think about the end of life and the death and dying process that we will all encounter one day, society's changed a lot. So it used to be that people only lived into their 30s or 40s or 50s, and you didn't have those problems because something was likely to kill people other than just old age.
Right.
And older, thankfully, with medicine and technology, and we have long, we get to a point where we kind of slowly decline. And assisted living facilities are great, but one of the issues that can happen there is that we get isolated from family, from friends. We get treated maybe like a thing rather than a human being who still is alive. And it seems like hospice does such a great job today. People just have wonderful experiences with hospice. I wonder if the church could be a similar community to offering the kinds of things that hospice offers, not in terms of the technical way, the way they deal with medicine, but the way that we maybe don't do it as well as we should, but as Christians in a church community, that we should care for one another as either someone we love is dying, or as someone in our church is grieving someone close to them dying. The way we can support each other. So many times people feel lonely and isolated, and the way we can obviously not right now, but normally be close with them and help them get through this. How do you think we might be able to do a better job as the church about caring for people in the death and dying process and helping them, seeing them as human beings? They are still made in the image of God. Is that something that you feel like we could do a better job of as Christians?
Oh yeah, definitely. I know in our church here in Winston, we have there's a group. It's called a respite care group, and mainly though they give relief to the caregiver, but that's a wonderful opportunity too, because a lot of the caregivers get very little time to themselves or time to have appointments or even go out to lunch with a friend. So that's a good way to serve. The other thing is, I remember when you did, you anointed Thad with oil when he was his last, I guess, couple of weeks. I always think that, ministers, if, of course, if somebody wants that, but in our church in Rocky Mount, we had a group of people that every time we did communion, which was once a month generally, there was a group of people that would take the elements and do communion with church members who couldn't get to church anymore. I think that's a wonderful opportunity. I know a lot of churches own, Holy Week, they'll do the foot washing, just, service type things like that. Just sharing the peace of Christ with each other is just a wonderful opportunity. And you don't have to necessarily give nursing care. It's just knowing that they haven't been forgotten.
Yeah, that's an interesting piece in this, is that, families, one of the reasons families are so important to us and to society, I think, is because we remember people in our family even after they're gone. Whereas, other people in society, like, you're forgotten immediately. And that's also something in the church that we can do, is remember people. We call them saints, right? We have All Saints Sunday, and we light a candle for them, and we remember their life and their presence. I want to ask you about, because you have done a lot of work in hospitals, and the role of medicine in all of this, because, in the West, so often we tend to view bodies, people's bodies as problems that need to be solved, right? That medicine can can treat an issue, and doctors maybe aren't always great at, and maybe they haven't been trained to have hard conversations with people about, one day there's not going to be a medicine that will fix this. What has that experience been like for you, and how can we make that transition that hospice does so well to the point where medicine is to be used as a means for an end, right? That your life will come to an end one day. Medicine is supposed to ease that suffering, but it's not going to fix everything. And so what's that experience been like for you, and how can we maybe do a better job of having a better understanding of what medicine is for in this, as we're mortal beings?
Wow, that's a good question. I think, but one of the things about expecting medicine to fix, or your doctor to fix you with a pill or whatever, is I see so many people they're afraid of aging. They're afraid of dying. And until you get to that point in life that you accept where you are as, God's child, he created you, and he he gave you a birth date, but he also has a day that you are going to die. He has it on his calendar. He knows the number of hairs on our heads. I mean, we need to come to terms with that and understand that our God loves us and cares for us. And we need to accept our days are numbered and live each day as a beloved child of God. And then I just think that putting all of our faith in medicine is just wrong. It's just not going to work. And I certainly think that you do need to go to the doctor. You need to take your blood pressure pills. A diabetic needs to take their insulin and watch their diet. And we all need to exercise and take care of the bodies that we are given. Paul, said, your bodies are the temple, and, the Holy Spirit lives in us. And so I don't know. I don't know.
Well, but at the same time, I mean, if you look at just in the United States and the healthcare system, the amount of money that is spent, I think in like our last 6 months of life, that I think people would say, especially Christians would say like, oh, we know like there's life after death, and we know we're limited and we're mortal, but then we go and we spend all this money and we want one more treatment, and we think one more medicine, one more surgery can help get us, and we think we'll be able to get 10 or 15 or 20 years. In reality, it's like a few months or a year or two. As I think about the season of Easter, the story about Easter seems to be that we're created. Creation is good. We're bodily beings. Jesus came on and took a body. Jesus died, but he was raised from the dead. He was raised bodily from the dead. That's one of the things we say we believe as Christians. In the early church, there were a group of people called Gnostics who believed that basically when you died, your soul left your body, and your soul was kind of floating around in heaven somewhere, but you didn't really have a body. And the Christian said, no, like when we are raised from the dead, when we are resurrected, we will be like Jesus. We will be raised bodily. So obviously our bodies very much matter to God, and the fact that God took on a body really matters. So medicine is good because we want to care for our bodies that God has given us. But it's just this balance, right? This balance between we're limited, finite creatures, and yet, so we won't live forever. And yet because our bodies are good, we should care for them. And it's just this delicate balance, it seems like. How did you get through there, Nash? And yet Easter reminds us that we don't have to be afraid of death.
Right.
Death is not good. It's not something we should welcome, but there's life after death, right? What difference do you think that makes as someone who works in the medical field? What difference do you think that makes?
Well, for the person that has no eternal faith, I guess they see it as the end. I don't know. I've never really talked to anybody about what they think happens next, although I have heard some people say, yeah, your body goes in the ground, you're eaten up by worms. I'm like, ooh. But seeing, I don't think death necessarily is a bad thing, because it's a transition. Okay. I think that as soon as we die, our heart quits, our brain shuts down, no more breath goes in and out of our lungs. We're already somewhere else. So it's just a transition. I don't see it as a bad thing anymore. I don't welcome myself to die. I mean, I'm certainly not suicidal, but I just think that it's going to be so much more than we ever imagine. That to think that all I have to do is breathe one last breath and I am in eternity with my God. I'm just okay with that. So my body is good for me here on earth, and I expect great things of a body and, with Jesus Christ. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah. No, that's a good word. Of course, on this side of heaven, these are the bodies we have. One of the things that this book, Being Mortal, talks about is you mentioned the way he chronicles the history of the assisted living facilities and all these sorts of things. And he talks about both personally with his own father and also as a doctor, other conversations he's had, having hard conversations with people.
Yeah.
That seems to be such an important thing today that very few people have hard conversations.
It is hard.
Yeah. Specifically about death and dying and about what people want,
Yeah.
what their wishes are,
Mm-hmm.
all these kinds of things. Do they want a DNR? I mean, these are really hard conversations. And yet I'm guessing from your experience, you would say they're really important conversations.
Absolutely. And I think it's important enough that as soon as you have someone else in your life that you love and want the best for them, if something were to happen to you, you need to have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly if you have children, you need to have a plan. But yeah, I mean, it's even hard for me to talk to my mom and dad about it because their ideas and their, the way they view death and dying is different than the way I view it. So we've had conversations about that. I am their healthcare power of attorney. And I've pretty much told them, well, this is what I see happening. Are you okay with this? Do you agree with this? Is there something specific you want me to consider or do for you? But I also think some people's last wishes can be a little absurd. Like some of the things that Pop has talked about with Grandma, I'm like, well, that's absurd. But, if that's what she wants, we need to honor that because we love her.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me when I was reading some of the conversations he talked about with people is he would ask them, if they were going into if he was about to do a surgery that he wasn't sure how it was going to go, and he would have to make a decision in there
during
the surgery, what was going to, well, beforehand, he would need to know, okay, what do you want? What would be, what do you want?
The worst case scenario
right.
for you.
And he
right.
said, okay, so like if things go badly and let's say, you're still alive, but this and this no longer work and you're limited in this way. Do you want that? Or would you rather, die and not have it? And he said, having those conversations allowed him to know exactly what to do in the surgery.
Right.
So when something happened, he would say, okay, well, they wanted, they did not want a kind of life that would look like this. And, and that was really interesting, the way that he was able to show that picture of what that conversation, how important that conversation was.
Well, I've said for many years, there are worse things than dying. Some of the things that we do in our hospitals, we don't treat our pets that way, and some of the things we do as far as just we keep treating and treating and treating, and doctors have a hard time having those hard conversations with the families. Or you've got families that won't listen. They can't hear what the doctor's telling them because they're in such deep grief or shock or something. And back when I first came out of nursing school, doctors had a lot more authority and decision making than they do today, which I'm not saying is a good or bad thing. I do very much appreciate allowing families to participate more in the end of life decision making, but sometimes, in my opinion, they're not always the best decisions.
Only sometimes.
Well, yeah. It's just, so what I do is I put myself in that position. I say, would I want that done to my mother, to my dad? You know, would I want that done to one of you as my child? And that's kind of the way I look at it.
One of the things I thought was really interesting in one of the chapters he talks about, because as soon as I read this, I immediately thought that exactly applies to my job as a pastor. And it was about, he described 3 kinds of doctors, or the different ways you can be a doctor. And he said kind of what you were just saying, that the old model was basically doctor knows best. So you would come in and you say, I'm a doctor, I've got my MD, I've got all this experience, I'm this kind of surgeon. So you just need to do what I say.
Right.
And he said, then it switched. And the second kind of doctor is the information doctor or something like that. And it's basically, you just say, A, B, C, D, here's what kind of disease you have, here are what the treatments we could do, here's what, blah, blah, blah. But you don't make any decisions for them. You don't tell them what they should do. You just say, litany of all these different things. And he said, ultimately, the best kind of doctor, what people really need from their doctor is, I think he calls it like interpretive doctor or something like that, where they have that hard conversation and they say, okay, sure, I've got this expertise and I know, how all this plays together. I've got all this information. Let's talk through this information and what it means. But at the end of the day, I'm here to help you interpret all of this. And let's make a decision together about the way forward. And I thought about, from my perspective, those are 3 different ways I can be a pastor. I can say, like, here's what you should do, or judge
here's
someone.
what you believe.
Yeah. Here, here's what the church believes. Like, you have to believe that. Or I can just say, well, here's like 15 theories of the atonement, and you pick which one. That people don't want that either. Or we can do the hard work of sitting down together, getting to know each other, talking about things, sharing our hearts, and interpreting what the Holy Spirit, discerning what the Holy Spirit is doing. So did any of that strike you? What did you think about doctors that you've encountered throughout your life? I'm sure they've all been great.
No, yeah. No, I appreciated his insight. I thought that was really good. The interesting thing, though, that I see a lot is a lot of your doctor types are the brainiacs, and a lot of times they don't have the social skills that a lot of, people in other professions maybe have. But also a lot of it is being self-aware. And so many people don't have that awareness about themselves, no matter what function or role there is in society. So it's not just about doctors, but I do believe that is a skill that this particular doctor worked on over time, because he saw the importance of it.
Yeah, it definitely helped me think about my work. So I thought that was interesting. Any other thoughts about just being mortal, or what it means to be a human being in this season of Good Friday and Easter and resurrection and having a body, and any other thoughts about medicine or being a nurse or anything like that you'd like to add to the conversation?
I think our human bodies are a miracle. The way they work, the way they function, from the tiniest little cell to, our skin is an organ. I mean, it's just amazing to me. I love being a nurse. I always wanted to be a nurse. I knew that's what I wanted to do when I graduated from high school. And the bedpans kind of threw me for a loop there for a minute. But you know what? I've gotten over that. It's a normal body function, but But yeah, I do love being a nurse. And I hope that I can work, for many more years, but sometimes I do get tired. And do you know what probably the worst thing about my job is?
No.
And not just with the COVID-19 thing, but it's families that are unrealistic about what happens in the hospital. There are some families that come in and they think they're in a, 5-star hotel. No, you're not. And I'm not your maid, but you got to love them too. And a lot of times they're reacting under the stress that they put. Whoa, sorry. Sorry. And so you just have to try to look at the situation through their eyes and help them navigate the foreign world that they're in, because the hospital does tend to be a foreign place for most of the world, hopefully.
Yeah, and those are very similar thoughts I have about churches as well, and people's expectation of church. So that's yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time and this conversation and your work as a nurse, and anyone out there who works in hospitals or is a medical provider in some way. We're very thankful for you, and I do think that this is. One of my favorite theologians, Stanley Hauerwas, says doctors, and I think you could expand that to nurses and all kinds of people, are the priests for modern society today. And for better or worse, maybe that shouldn't be such at that level, but they are held in some of the highest respect and esteem, and for good reason. And so we thank you for your work, and especially in the midst of everything that's going on. And thank you for your time talking about this subject tonight.
Absolutely. I love you, Parker.
Okay, love you too.
Bye.